feet. I'm 24 years old, and that often means that I do this really silly thing where when I come to conferences like this, I get nervous and I try to dress up and look much older than I am. And because of that, today I wore these like very spiky high heels to feel official. And then I came in and I saw we had this lovely braided rug with all of these little like holes and bumps and dips. And I don't know if the gentlemen in the audience know that, but that's basically like flooring kryptonite for women in stilettos. So here we are. So I'm here to talk to you today about literacy and education. I run Deep, and it's a nonprofit that runs writing workshops for local students. And I love what I do. It's a lot of fun. The kids are really hilarious. And we operate based on a couple main principles. One of them is community building. I believe very much that if your kids aren't on the same page as you, and if they're not talking to each other and getting along with each other, it's hard to get anything done. And that's true for my community of volunteers as well. And another principle that we have is that you never know if something is going to work until you try it. So you have to try it. And that means that I fail sometimes, but it also means that I come up with really fun stuff, or my volunteers come up with really incredible things. They're just this great resource. And one of the things that we've learned in all of the teaching that we've done is this really surprisingly, painfully simple idea that makes teaching about 10,000 times easier. And all it is that you have to explain to your children why they're there. And it's kind of incredible because we believe that this is an assumption. We believe students know why we're educating them, why we're making them read books, why they're writing, but they don't, because no one's ever really told them for the most part. And so that's a lot of what I try to do, and that's what I'm talking about today, is the process of embracing the question why and not being afraid of it, right? Because as educators, and when I say educators, I mean everyone in this room, right? Because if you're not a teacher, you're either a parent or a big brother or a sister or a guardian or a friend or a mentor or something. So we're all educators. And educators sometimes get very frightened of the question why, particularly from older students, because we don't always know the answer, you know? And it's, as kids get older and as we get older, the answers get more complicated and scary. And the process of trying to figure out why we're there, why we're doing this, gets frightening. But I'll tell you, when I was a little kid, and I was like 7 years old, the most amazing educators I've ever had in my life were my parents. And when I was going to bed, you know, I'd run up to my room and I would tuck myself in and I would announce to my parents, you know, I'm ready for you to come tuck me in. And my mother would come into the room and she would, you know, sing me a song or tell me a bedtime story, like the stuff that moms are supposed to do, and she was great at it. And she'd kiss me on the forehead and she'd leave. And then my father would come in and he would just sit down next to me on the bed, and he'd say, so Catherine, what questions do you have for me? And I only realized much later that that was weird. I thought that was really normal. I thought everyone had like question time with their dad at night. So you'd come in and you'd sit down and you'd be like, Catherine, what questions do you have for me? And I was 7 years old, you know, and totally crazy about my dad, and didn't want to go to bed, because what a 7-year-old does. So even if I didn't have a question, I'd come up with one. I'd think of something that I didn't know the answer to, and I'd ask him. So he'd come in and sit down and say, Catherine, you know, what questions do you have for me? And I'd be like, oh, okay, well, why is the sky blue? You know? And he would take this so seriously. He would look at me, he'd be like, okay, why is the sky blue? Well, Catherine, it has to do with the way the atmosphere refracts light. It's not actually blue. And I would sit there and I'd be like, oh, okay, well, don't want to go to bed yet, so follow-up question. So I'd say, okay, why does that change the color of the sky? Why does refraction change it? My dad's still very serious. He'd say, well, you know, it has to do with the wavelengths. Shorter wavelengths like blue get bounced around. Longer wavelengths like red get, you know, don't get interfered with. They come down just fine. And so I'd be over here and I'd be like, okay, don't want this to be over yet. Okay, so why does light travel in waves? You know, and most parents at this point would be like, honey, go to bed. or, you know, well, sweetie, it's very complicated. I'll talk to you tomorrow about it. But no, my father says, well, Catherine, it has to do with the wave-particle theory. Have you ever heard of that? You know? And so it's this very funny process, but it made me an incredibly happy kid, and an incredibly curious, inquisitive kid, and a very full of weird knowledge kid. And I loved it, right? And so I believed that this was the way to go about the world, asking questions and finding answers, because every time you ask a question, right, the answer gets cooler. and more interesting and more exciting. So I go to kindergarten, and I'm like, awesome, great, okay, I've got all these adults, and they gotta know the answers to everything, so I'm gonna ask all of these questions, you know? But it turns out what is cute and endearing to my parents is often obnoxious in a school setting. You discover this, you know, so I'm sitting in kindergarten, and the teacher's like, so we're gonna start with the letter A. Why? Because that's the first letter. Why? Because the Greeks picked it. I don't know why. Because. You know, and I would find myself leaning forward, going, because what? Because what? You know, expecting more of an answer to that question, but there wasn't more, right? Because this teacher has 30 kids, and she's incredibly busy, and she just has to get us ready for these tests so that we can pass them, so that, you know, she can get her merit pay, or so that she can make sure that we move on to the next grade, and she doesn't have time for the why. So they say because. And you know, when you're a little kid, you kind of persist, and it's still sort of cute, so they put up with it. And then when you get to middle school, it becomes seriously annoying. And when you get to high school, it becomes like an act of terrorism in the classroom. You know, can you imagine sitting in a high school classroom, having your teacher say, okay, students, next week is our test on Heart of Darkness. And I did this. My teacher said, next week is our test on Heart of Darkness. And I was like, why are we reading Heart of Darkness? And she was like, because it is assigned to you. Why is it assigned to us? Well, because it is on the statewide tests. It's on the AP exam. Why is it on the AP exam? Because it is! You know, and they get really frustrated. And totally understandably, because there is so much to deal with and so much pressure and not ever enough time to answer this question. But I argue that that is not the way we should go about education. Because it's easier and it's instinctive to just say because and to get to the stuff that you think is important. But the because is what's important. The why is what's important. And the content is just part of what you get from that. It's tools to get to that, right? So I graduated, and I was a little frustrated with education, so I decided to become a professional educator. And I found it deep, and I said, okay, I'm gonna figure this out. You know, I'm gonna create education that's fun, and the kids wanna be there. And you know, so I tried a bunch of things, and we arrived at this great structure with 10 kids in a room and 2 teachers, and it's very community-based, right? So the teachers don't do a lot of talking, the kids do a lot of talking. Teachers just ask questions for the most part and kind of crowd control. But you know, still sometimes you fail because education is hard, and it involves a constant process of asking why and trying to figure out how to fix it. And I remember I was teaching this one class at Favorite Middle School. And it was a class of all boys, and they were in 6th grade, and they're very rowdy. And I'm sure you can imagine, you know, me with my like skinny, chipper girl self is like about as close to an alien creature as you can possibly get in this room. And they had no idea why I was there or what I was doing there, and it was really hard. You know, it was this huge struggle for me to try and figure out what to do with them, and I just wanted them to write, you know, so I kept pushing them to write, and you know, trying different things, and just getting really frustrated. And after class one day, this kid comes up to me, and he's like, hey, Miss Catherine. And I was like, what, sweetheart? He was like, why do we gotta be here? I just want to play basketball. Like, why? Why am I here? And it was an incredibly terrifying moment for me, because I realized that I'd been so caught up in just trying to get them to write things or get them to listen to me or get them to obey, that I didn't have an answer ready for that question. You know, and that was the whole thing that frustrated me about being a student, was people not having the answer to that question. I didn't. And it was very scary. So I went home, and I was like, okay, reassess. And so I decided to sit down and really think about why I teach writing. And so I'd like to demonstrate with you for a second this process, this like why, you know, this asking of yourself. And normally it's helpful to have a very avid small child available for this task. But since I don't, I'm gonna have to use you guys. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go like this. And when I go like this, you're gonna pretend to be inquisitive small children or annoyed small children. And you're just gonna ask me, why? And I would like it if you ask me loudly and insistently, because I don't have this part scripted, so it's helpful to me to feel on the spot. So we're going to do one practice round. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Why? Excellent. and I said, okay, well, I believe writing is important.
Why?
Well, writing is important because it helps you to clarify your thoughts.
Why?
Well, it helps you to clarify your thoughts because you can't always see what's going on in your head, right? So I can, for example, tell you to like make a thumbs up sign, and you can all make a thumbs up sign, right? Yes. And it's very easy for you to tell if you've done it right because you can look. You can say, okay, like my hand looks like her hand, looks like, all right, we're good. But I can't look at you and say, think clearly, right? That doesn't work at all. Because you're like, I don't know, am I thinking clearly? How does one think clearly? And so what writing is it's a way to take the thoughts that are in your head and put them in a place where you can see them as easily as you can see a thumbs up sign, right? And I believe that that is important.
Why?
Why? Well, I believe that that is important because you can't change the way you think until you can see the way that you think.
Why?
Because, that's an excellent question, yes. Well, you can't change the way that you think if you can't see the way that you think because, and seeing it, maybe writing isn't the only way, but it's the easiest way I know how, right? Because I'm working on it here. This is improvisational. All right, I'm working on your principles. Because, let's see, how do I phrase this? When you want to fix anything, right? So if I say I have a broken car, you know, and I tell a mechanic to fix it, right? The first thing he's going to do is open the hood because you can't see what's wrong unless you like take a look and mess around with it and see, right? And the same goes for a doctor, right? He has to take an X-ray to see your broken leg. Or, you know, what are some other examples? Can anyone think of anything? No? Yeah, okay. So exactly. So if a doctor has to take an X-ray and if a mechanic has to look under the hood, then you got to look inside your head to see what's going on if you want to change the way that you think. Now, I believe that changing the way you think is important.
Why?
Okay, this is the last one. Because that's how you know you don't know that you have a mind until you change it, right? And that's the process of growing and being a good citizen and a good person and a good friend is the process of changing your mind and getting better at things, right? I don't want to be like I was when I was 11.
Why?
Because when I was 11, I was very selfish and it was very important to me to spend 2 hours on my hair every day. I don't want to be like that anymore. I have different priorities. So that's what I did, and I did the same process with reading, and I won't make you guys do it again, but where I ended up, essentially, is that reading is important because it gives you insight into other people, right, and into consequences, and into emotions and situations that you've never thought of, and it helps you not make mistakes because you've read about other people making those mistakes before. It helps you make good choices, right? It helps you be compassionate. Right? And a world in which people are insightful and compassionate is a world in which people are much happier, I think. So I went home and I thought about that and I planned my lesson for the next week for the rowdy 6th grade Hebrew boys. And I was thinking about this. I was like, okay, so I want them to learn to be compassionate and I want them to be respectful of each other and I want them to learn to put their thoughts on paper so they can see them. And so I planned this lesson that involved this like very violent but compelling clip from The Wire that I love. And a section from Top Dog Underdog by Susan Lloyd Parks. And it was like a different classroom. And it wasn't because I walked in there and I told them these reasons. It was because these reasons guided how I picked what I taught and how I taught it, right? But they were just dead silent and riveted. And because I spent time reading texts about respect or texts about community or things that I loved, right, they responded to that and they enjoyed it. And I remember these two boys who'd been fighting the whole time, just vicious with each other, teasing each other. One of them because he couldn't read very well and was very insecure, and the other one for other reasons. But I paired them together to do a scene at the end of the class, and not only were they civil to each other, but they actually helped each other. Right? The one kid helped the other kid read his lines, and the other kid helped the other one act better, right, and be more present on stage. And it was just so beautiful to watch, and the reason for that was because I didn't tell them to behave. I didn't say because I said so, right? They figured it out on their own. I helped them discover why. So I believe that that's a lot more useful. And I want to end on one short poem that one of my kids wrote. We published these little books of their stuff, and they're so good. And this is one of the students from that class. And my favorite thing about asking why and really trying to figure out why you're there is that then you can turn it back around on your students, which is equally fun, right? And make them answer that question. So I asked him the question, if you were kind of weather, what kind of weather would you be and why? And he said a tsunami. And I said, okay, why? And he wrote this poem. He said, I'm a tsunami because I rise. I rise because people love to tell lies. I rise like the sun and the moon. I rise every day at noon. I rise from big things that interrupt my sleep. I rise from the big ocean of the deep. I rise to destroy towns, but I also rise because people have frowns. So, anyway, he didn't write that because I said so. He wrote it because he had his own reasons why.